Great, thank you very much indeed, Marion. So, hello, colleagues. Lovely to see you all on a sunny Thursday. Certainly, it's sunny where I am on a Thursday afternoon. We will talk for the next hour or so about particularly the postgraduate teaching apprenticeship, which we've developed as one of our SCITT routes to add to the range of training options that we already offer. So I'm going to do a little bit of input. Lots of you know me, but if you don't, I'm Patrick. I'm the director of the SCITT. So I have the wonderful privilege of working with lots of fantastic colleagues across a big geographical range and a brilliant central team of colleagues. And in particular, I'll be working, and my colleagues Marion and Daphne will both be talking a little bit as we go through this session as well. So we're recording it, we'll send it out with the recording and with the slides. We'll make sure there's time at the end for individual questions, but do include questions as we go through. And in just a minute or two, we'll put a couple of key documents in the chat, which will be the basis for what we talk about as well. So these are the things we'll talk about in the next little while. Rather than saying what they all are, we will just do them and keep moving along. But hopefully that will cover lots of the key questions that you will have about this new route that we've developed for trainee teachers. Just to say a tiny little bit about who we are as an organisation. The SCITT first started just over a decade ago, initially covering Oxfordshire, and we developed 3 regional branches in Oxfordshire several years back, and then last year we developed 2 further branches, or 2 further hubs in Wiltshire and 2 in Berkshire as well. So we now have 7 hub bases where we run our training, and the apprenticeship will be running in all of those 7 locations as well. We have always looked to find new routes to bring people into teaching, and this is very much what's motivated us and driven us to set up this postgraduate teaching apprenticeship as well. So rather than say lots more about who we are, there's lots of detail on our website and information in the guide that we'll put in the chat for you as well. That gives a very rough sense of the areas that we cover, and we do have people currently training across all of those regions in our 7 locations, and considering whether we expand further, but we do have people outside of those 3 counties coming and training with us as well. And the key reason why we set up all 7 of those hubs was really to make sure that good quality teacher training was accessible, and the training aspect, the hub location was accessible for people across a wide geographical area. So the document that covers lots of the things that we'll talk about today and more is our SCITT guide that we produce every year. So that's got lots of information, background about who we are, how we operate, a summary of our 3 routes, and then some much more detailed information about our SCITT programs, our postgraduate teaching apprenticeship, which we're talking about today, and our assessment only route, as well as some information about how to get involved with what we do, including our regular SCITT programs, as well as the PGTA, and linked within that guide document that Marion's just put in the chat there, you'll see that there's a placements form as well. It's incredibly helpful if you can complete that and send that through to us. That means that as we're setting up placements for our regular SCITT courses, as well as the apprenticeship, we've got your details and we can liaise and correspond as we go through. There's also a section that you'll see there, section 5 on marketing and general engagement with potential trainee teachers. We'll mention that a little bit more towards the end, but hopefully there's some useful information in that section as well, in terms of how to demonstrate to your local community and wider community that you're involved in teacher training, and that your school could be a place where new teachers train. So one of the key reasons why we developed this apprenticeship route was to try and find a new way of bringing in more teachers at a time when we are all experiencing significant challenges in recruiting new teachers. So this first graph just maps out over the last 12 years or so the extent to which the number of people coming into training has not met the targets that the Department for Education have set. You can see in particular the last 3 or 4 years that we've been a very long way off the national targets that have been set, and that's across all entrants into ITT. Lots of you will know that in particular primary in recent years has become very challenging. Just to give you a measure of those numbers there, in 2021 nationally, that's across England, we recruited nearly 15,000 trainees in primary. This year, the cohort in training is just over 8,000. So you can see a very marked drop. And I have to say, primary is a particular worry of ours at the moment, because the numbers this year look lower than the same point last year. So one of the reasons why we're strongly encouraging all schools, but particularly primary schools, to get involved in the apprenticeship is that it's a potential way of insulating you a little bit against the worries of the applicant pool shrinking very rapidly. So particularly trying to kind of get that message across that if you've got somebody in your school or your community who might be wanting to teach, this could be a brilliant way of making sure you've got somebody that you're growing across the academic year who will be there ready to be a teacher in your school at the end of it. The special school sector, and I know a number of special school colleagues have asked about the recording as well. Apologies, it's a very small graph on there, but basically some of the most recent data about special school recruitment is particularly concerning, especially in terms of the number of temporarily filled vacancies that special schools have. And again, we've already got a number of special schools that are working with us to train teachers next year on this apprenticeship route. And then finally, in secondary, if you're in secondary, these numbers will be familiar to you. This was the number last summer of people against the national target for individual subjects. And as you can see, it's only really down at the bottom there, history, PE and classics, where the national totals were met. And we've already got a number of schools who've recruited people in subjects like RE and music to train on the apprenticeship route, because those, as you can see, are areas where there's particular concern about the number of people coming in. So just a reminder, doubt that you necessarily needed the reminder, but we hope that the apprenticeship does open up the possibility of bringing people in at a time across primary, special and secondary where we know there are concerns. So we've developed this year. It's been running nationally for a couple of years. We've spent a lot of time over the last 18 months or so, definitely in particular researching, working with other people who've been running the PGTA to try and work out the optimal way of doing it. So a lot of thought has gone into this, and we're going to run it essentially alongside our SCITT programs that have been in existence for 10 or 12 years or so. So we've tried to make sure we've got the benefits of all of the things that we've learned over the last decade in terms of our courses, and then building the apprenticeship and the structures around it. So in essence, this is just an introduction. Similar to all apprenticeships, there has to be an element of on-the-job and off-the-job training, and it's the off-the-job training that we've worked hard to integrate what we currently do in terms of our SCITT curriculum within that. And we've therefore also made sure it's a 12-month program. Some of you will have noted just a couple of weeks ago, the government changed the rulings on this, whilst we're pleased about that, and we will amend things for next year. We're sticking with the thing that we've been planning for the last 18 months or so. So we'll talk about the very specific details of when it begins, when the contracts begin, etc., in just a little while. But essentially a 12-month course. For those of you who've worked with us for quite a while, it has some similarities to our salaried program, our salaried school direct program that we ran until about 4 years ago, when the national funding for that was taken out. And so we've used a lot of the learning that we gained during that process as well. Here's the essence of it then. 12-month program. We're going to start ours on the 30th of June, so that all of the apprentices will have a month or the final kind of few weeks of this academic year in their school. And definitely we'll talk a little bit more about what they'll be doing during that period, but we wanted to make sure there was a significant induction period. We will carry out some induction activities and some preliminary training, but making sure that they've got a good chunk of time in school with you, so that when they start in September, lots of the kind of key bits of detail have been confirmed between the mentor, the school, and the apprentice. The great thing about it is that the training fee comes directly from the apprenticeship levy, so there's no training costs to you or the applicant. That comes to us. That allows us to run the programme. And then the national guidance sets out that all apprentices will be paid at least unqualified one, which is about £22,000 on the national scales. That's funded by the school, and we know that a number of multi-academy trusts are looking at ways of kind of offsetting some of that cost centrally. So if that's the case and you're in a multi-academy trust, please do explore that. Quite a number of trusts I've been talking to recently have recognised the significance of those numbers, particularly in primary, where the concern is about recruitment of new teachers. In secondary, there is some grant funding available for a number of subjects, and that's broadly in line with where there's bursary funding for secondary subjects on the non-apprenticeship, the regular SCITT routes. As with all of our programs, we've invested a lot of time and thought in our mentoring approach. So in exactly the same way as we do for our SCITT programs, mentors and apprentices will have the same handbook, exactly the same structure and calendar, and the same guidance. So extensive mentor training right from the outset, regular contact with us as a central team. And in that handbook and the training will explain the expectations and the requirements in terms of mentor meetings and mentor observations, very much running, as I've said, in line with how we've always operated our SCITT programs. Now, because it's an ITT program, it has to include a second placement, and we've built that in where we think the most kind of optimal point in the year is, and definitely we'll talk about that a little bit more. So there will be a contrasting placement in a different school, and we'll talk about the detail of how that plays out. And then we've also built in, as we have had to for all of our ITT programs, the thing that is now known as ITAP, or intensive training and practice. So part of the national requirements from the DFE about all teacher training programs is they have to have this thing called ITAP. So we've built that into our apprenticeship program in exactly the same way that we have done for the SCITT routes. Completion, therefore, so apprentices will start at the very end of June, and then completion will happen in July at the end of the academic year, and then there's this period known as the endpoint assessment, which is a technical process that relates to all apprenticeships, not just those involved in education. So those are things that we will explain in more detail as we go through. And then the final kind of key thing to say is, of course, because it's an apprenticeship route and a salaried route, apprentices will be able to take on some some teaching with sole responsibility because they're paid employees of the school. So unlike the SCITT programs where the trainees, the associate teachers are always supernumerary, on the apprenticeship route right from day one in September, they will be able to take on some teaching. So that's just a kind of summary overview, and in the guide that we've shared already, that is covered in section 8.1. Just to map out a few of the kind of key advantages, really. Hopefully lots of these things are self-evident, but we've put them in here just to kind of reiterate the key point. Growing your own staff, we think, is a thing that's always been significant. We've always had lots of people trained through our different SCITT routes who are known to schools. This makes it even more the case that you can bring people in, build their skills and confidence within your school culture at a time and at a rate that we think works well. We'll always have lots of input in terms of mentor support and training, and that's very much making sure that mentors understand their roles. And as with all of our SCITT programs, we do a lot of thinking about how to make sure that we're not overburdening schools and mentors. So a lot of the kind of heavy lifting in terms of the organisation, the collection of evidence, etc., is all done centrally to make sure that the mentor's work is really streamlined and focused on the things that make the greatest difference. I've mentioned already the handbook. So as with all of our programs, there'll be very detailed guidance and support. So the handbook, the training that we do at the start of the year, and then right the way throughout the year, regular updates in terms of our bulletins and other bits of training. So you will always feel informed. Your mentors will always feel informed about what's happening at any given stage. It's obviously cost effective. The apprenticeship levy pays for the fees. And as we've said already, this allows you to have people teaching from the 1st of September with some sole responsibility, so you can build people into your timetable right from day one. And then a key thing that we think is really important, that always influences the way we operate. We want everything that we do to be preparing people for long and rewarding careers in the profession. And some of the kind of exploration and the research work that we did suggested that there are some providers nationally where the apprenticeship route has been really used to kind of get people in, get them doing lots of teaching, and therefore and then sometimes leading to significant burnout. And we've really thought carefully about how we make sure we maximize the opportunities for people to be doing some teaching with sole responsibility from the start, but also not overburdening them, so that as they work through the apprenticeship route, they're developing their skills and their knowledge, they're well supported, and we really take their well-being very, very seriously. So our SCITT programs, and as a provider, we've always had one of the highest completion rates of any provider in the country, and we think that's really important. We don't just want to burn people out. We want to prepare them, inspire them, and motivate them so they go on to have long and rewarding careers. Just put a few points in here. By all means, use any of this information when you're talking to potential apprentices as well. So these are advantages we think for schools and for apprentices. We've always taken a very personalised approach, and the apprenticeship route in particular has a kind of responsive nature to it. It starts with an initial skill scan where we'll talk to apprentices about what they've done already. And so there's always a kind of flexibility and a responsiveness that's there. We've got our very carefully built curriculum, which I'll mention in just a moment. And that's delivered in a range of different ways, both online and in face-to-face sessions. And we think having regular contact, and lots of the other apprenticeships we know have predominantly online training sessions. Some are kind of asynchronous, just video recordings. But we do think that having regular face-to-face contact, time to work with others in a setting where they're learning and developing and sharing their journeys is really important. So that we've retained that as a key feature of our apprenticeship alongside the SCITT programs. I've mentioned already the focus on workload, and we do a lot of work to make sure that people can organise their time effectively, that they know what to spend their time and devote their energies on, and that's a really key, obviously a key part of helping people become good teachers is to manage their own workload in a timely and appropriate way. The again, benefit of training on this route as compared to others is, as I've already said, the well-being strand, the focus on supporting people at different stages. When we know things might get busy, there might be additional bits of support required, and we'll always be able to provide that as a central team and network. And of course, because it's a salaried route, this does mean that we're able to unlock potential applicants, particularly in primary and some of those secondary subject areas where there's not national funding. This will allow us across our partnership to bring people in who at the moment are unable to train because of the financial constraints that exist. So hopefully that gives you some kind of pointers as to why we're doing this. I'll just mention very briefly, lots of you who are working with us already know about our integrated curriculum approach, but really important to stress that we take the actual content of the training really seriously. We think very hard about the skills, the knowledge that we want our new teachers to have, and the research base that underpins that. So our integrated curriculum has been through various stages of Ofsted inspection. It's been through the market review. We refine it every year, built on some great bodies of educational research to really make sure that our new teachers come out at the end of this process feeling confident, competent, and determined to make a difference. And those 7 areas are mapped out here. Lots of the things that you would expect in terms of support with behaviours and pedagogy, thinking about how children learn, a real strong focus on subject knowledge, both in primary and secondary, and definitely we'll touch on that a little bit more later. And then these 3 areas we think are really important. And again, we've retained a strong focus on these right the way throughout and still there in our apprenticeship program as well. We've always thought very hard about how we ensure people develop their professional identity, how they work collaboratively with other colleagues. So we do a lot of work on self-awareness, on working collaboratively, on developing leadership skills. And then that section on values is really important. We've always focused on the extent to which we try to make education as diverse and inclusive and equitable as possible. And that does mean every year the vast majority of all the people who train with us come out very committed and wanting to work in state schools. That's really important for us that we have that ethos. And then I've mentioned it already, but it's a really significant point. The final strand there about well-being. So our own well-being as professionals, our colleagues and the pupils that we work with is a strand that we look at all the way through. Final little point, we've worked hard on thinking about the sequencing of our curriculum as well. And those of you that have worked with us for a number of years will know we've developed this kind of sense of a sequenced curriculum built over developmental phases, recognizing that at the start of the training journey, people still have a lot to learn. There's a significant sense of overwhelm sometimes. And we've thought about that very carefully in the context of the apprenticeship. People will be taking on teaching with sole responsibility, but we also want to make sure that they've got headspace and they've got energy and time to think and learn and reflect as well. So early on, lots of support and a more limited amount of teaching, moving through to the middle phase and the late phase, and then on to gaining QTS and, of course, becoming ECTs beyond. So that same approach to a developmental curriculum, building knowledge and skills across the 12 months, we still have built very clearly into our apprenticeship model as well. So I hope that all gives a bit of a useful preamble. I'm going to hand over to Daphne, who's going to talk a little bit more about some of the detail of how it will all work. So Daphne, I'll keep going with the slides if you are happy to talk.
Brilliant. Thank you, Patrick. So as Patrick has already said, we have got this kind of scaffolded, graduated kind of approach to developing that teaching and that confidence over the course of the course. So we're going to show you now how much teaching the associate teachers can actually do, the apprentices can actually do, and that will be increasing along the course of the year, from the early phase to the middle phase through to the late phase. Okay. So before we even get started with the kind of teaching, we have a really fantastic induction process in place for the apprentices. So they will be starting with you on the 30th of June. And during that time, they'll have the opportunity to kind of spend time in schools with you, really get a sense of the school kind of way of doing things. They'll get to know the expectations that you have, and they'll get to spend time in the school environment, etc. We will have two induction days with them at the SCITT, where we will go through all the important things in terms of them understanding the programme, in terms of understanding the expectations. But for the vast majority of that time, they will be with you in your schools, and they will have opportunity to practice their teaching with expert colleagues, to get lots of feedback, and to really feel prepared for that start in September. And that is really important, we feel, in terms of their journey, that they're able to kind of practice in a kind of supportive environment to begin with, so that when they're starting with you in September, they're coming and they're feeling like, yeah, I'm ready for this, and I know what I'm doing, and I know this school, and I know the processes. So that is going to be a really good part of the induction process and the way that we've built this particular program. They will then continue doing off-the-job training in August. That is a requirement of the apprenticeship, that they do need to engage with off-the-job training every month. So it doesn't really matter how much that is, but there needs to be some engagement with off-the-job training. So what we have created is a series of kind of induction modules that they will be completing remotely. And again, that will be really valuable input, such as thinking about how do we get the most out of observing others. It will be looking at kind of safeguarding, it will be looking at our program. So lots and lots of really valuable input that are going to help them feel really, really prepared for that start in September. So that is something that we feel is very strong about the program that we're offering. Now, I know that timetabling is at the forefront of lots of your minds in terms of, well, how much can I get these apprentices to be teaching? And as Patrick has already mentioned, you know, we're really keen for our apprentices to have that headspace to kind of think and to learn and to develop in that gradual kind of way. So they will start off with 6 to 9 hours of teaching in the early phase, and the next slide that we've got is going in a little bit more detail, and I'll talk to you a little about that. But as Patrick did say, that is whole class teaching. That is them being able to be timetabled, and they can do general teacher duties alongside that as well. That does then increase to 10 to 13 hours in the middle phase. And we will have the second placement incorporated in that time as well, which I'll speak to you a little bit about later as well. And then in the late phase, they do up to 80% of a full teaching timetable. So you get quite a lot out of the apprentices once they're feeling more equipped to be able to take on quite a lot of teaching. I know that there are other providers that, you know, as Patrick mentioned, can kind of throw these apprentices in right from the start on 80% timetables. And we did look at that option, and we just felt that that did not work for the way that we believe teacher education should be, and that it's really important to support all of our teachers to kind of have a really kind of positive experience as they start in their teaching career, and that actually that kind of developmental approach, building things up slowly, making sure that they're feeling supported and that they're feeling successful as much as possible, is really key to training great teachers, but also to retention in the long term. You know, if we're training teachers and we're spending all that time and all that money and investing it for them to burn out within a couple of years, there's very little point to it all. So that is very much our guiding principle as well. So on the next slide, you can see a little bit more of a breakdown there in terms of the days that they're going to be with you and the days that they're going to be with us. So in that early phase, which is September through to December, they do, particularly in the first term, they do 2 days of off-the-job training. So that is training when they're coming to us, they're having their input, their central curriculum sessions. Some of those will be online, some of those will be in our regional hubs, and they will have 3 days a week working with you in your schools. Okay, so that is 3 days a week that you can timetable them for that very first part of the year. In terms of teaching, as I've mentioned, that is 6 to 9 hours, so about 3 hours a day of sole teaching that they can do. And they need to have 2 hours of observations a week. We still believe, even you're an apprentice, it's important that you're getting out there, that you're going to see expert colleagues, that you're really learning and focusing on that learning by observing. And that is really important to us. And they have 4 hours there of PPA. Now, what you'll notice here is that secondary associate teachers, apprentices, are able to teach a little bit more from term 2 onwards. And that is simply because the primary apprentices will be having some additional days to develop subject expertise. As you know, in primary, if your primary colleagues here on the call, you'll be more than aware of the vast amount of subject knowledge that our primary colleagues need to have in order to teach. And so we make sure that they're really getting lots of input in that area, so that they're developing their skills and their knowledge in relation to that as well. Secondary, they don't have so many days because there's a little bit less breadth to cover there. And so from term 2 onwards, they are actually in a little bit more, and they can teach slightly more, as you can see here on the slide. Okay, so that can increase up to 11 hours of teaching in term 2 for secondary colleagues. Then in the middle phase, are we going straight in the middle phase? They're doing 1 day of off-the-job training, so that reduces, and then they're with you for 4 days a week. So you have 4 days a week with them. They can do up to 13 hours of teaching there. And again, they continue with their 2 hours of observations, and they've got 5 hours of PPA. And then for the final little bit, the late phase, again, they continue 1 day a week with us, doing all the kind of input, the integrated curriculum bits, as well as their subject knowledge, and 4 days a week with you. And that's when they can teach up to 80% of a timetable, so up to 16 hours. And we've reduced a little bit the PPA there and the hours of observation. Okay, so hopefully that provides some kind of overall sense of the amount of teaching that they can do. If we now move on to the next slide, we can see information about the second placement. So as Patrick did say, it is a requirement for any ITT programme that there is a contrasting second placement. So that is something that we have built in. We've built it in, because it's a requirement, but also we do genuinely believe that it is an important part of extending their learning and making sure that they become well-rounded teachers. So we have gone for, as little as we can in a sense, so that it doesn't have too much of an impact on our school, whilst wanting to make sure that they do get enough time in the school to be able to learn from it and develop their practice. So they will be away from their main school, from their employing school, between the 2nd of February and the 20th of March. That's 18 days in total in a second placement, but they do have a few days to do their intensive training and practice, which I know, again, Patrick did mention that is something that all providers now need to have in place for their trainees. We would like our schools to work with partner schools to organise those second placements, but of course we have lots of contacts with lots of schools, and we're very happy to support with making arrangements for second placement. So that is something that we can all discuss together. Of course, we will have apprentices on different programmes, and where we're able to coordinate direct swaps, that is always something that we will do. The challenge that we sometimes have with that is just, of course, because we operate across quite a large geographical area, it is not always easy to do direct swaps. So if we have got somebody in biology that's in Bath, we might not reasonably expect them to go to Banbury for a second placement. So those are the kind of things that we need to have in our minds. Just a side note, if we've got anybody here that's interested in the kind of special school, nursery school side of things, we do need to have a slightly extended second placement for apprentices that are working in those contexts. And that will mean just 5 days in July where we'll want them to go to their second placement, and a slightly extended block to bring the total up to 35 days in a mainstream school for that. But we can talk to you, if you are concerned with that, we can talk to you about that particular element as well. Right, in terms of the routes that we offer then for primary, we have 3 different options. We've got the primary 5 to 11, then we've got the kind of nursery school primary 3 to 7 early years route, and then we've also got the special school 5 to 11 route that we're offering as well. Okay. Now, subject specialism is something that is really important to us. It's something that we've built in to have weekly for our SCITT route, and it's something that we wanted to continue doing. We know again that there are other providers that do lots of different variations, and that sometimes subject isn't really at the forefront of everything, but we do believe that having high levels of subject specialism is really key to being an effective teacher. And so in terms of our primary specialism, that is why we do have some additional days where we're getting our apprentices out of school so that they can really develop that really well and become strong teachers. So they will look at kind of early reading, they'll look at writing, they'll look at mathematics, which of course are kind of the essential building blocks of all other areas of learning. But we also explore lots of the other subjects, all of the other subjects as well, by kind of returning to things. So it's not just kind of one-off, well, we'll look at this and then we'll never return back to it, but we really support them to develop that confidence and that competence to teach across all of the subjects, the different subjects. We've got a fantastic kind of offering as well for secondary. You can see here that we cover absolutely all of the subjects, mostly apart from classics. Really is the only one that I can kind of see here that isn't there. That's slightly harder to find. But yeah, so any area that you're looking or you're thinking, yeah, we would really like an apprentice in that, that is something that we're able to offer. And you can see there that we've got the whole range of subjects that are usually offered in secondary schools. Okay. And similarly for secondary, in terms of subject-specific training, we have got some amazing subject specialists. They're really, really knowledgeable, very much often still very much based in school, so really having up-to-date knowledge of the kind of practices and the way to do things in schools at the moment. And all of our associate teachers on the secondary routes benefit from having weekly subject-specific training as well. And the way that we build things in is that they are having the opportunity to really integrate the learning that they're getting from our central curriculum sessions into a really subject specific way. So if we're looking at, let's say we're looking at questioning in our central curriculum session, they will then go to their subject specialist and okay, well, what does that really look like in an MFL classroom? And let's unpick that, let's practice that, let's really kind of develop and deepen our understanding of it. So we always get some really fantastic feedback from our subject specific training, and I think it is really one of the strengths of our programme.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Stephanie. I'm just checking if there's been any questions in the chat so far. I think probably not, in which case let's carry on. Marion is very kindly going to talk us through some bit more detail about the employment, the salary aspects, and then the recruitment process. So I'm happy to keep sharing, Marion, if you're okay to do the talking.
That'd be great. Thank you, Patrick. Excellent. Okay, so as we have mentioned earlier, this is an employment-based salaried route to QTS. So any apprentice needs to be employed by the main placement school for the duration of the apprenticeship. So that covers the period where they're in their second placement and every day of the week where they have central training sessions as well as their time teaching in your school. For the employment, every school needs to follow their standard policies related to pay and employment and the standard school teacher pay and conditions guidance, which states that for this route, the apprentices need to be paid at a minimum of unqualified 1, though you can pay more than that if you would like to. and that starts from the start of the apprenticeship on the 30th of June. As with any advert for a new position and of employment, you need to clearly advertise the rate of pay that you're offering for that particular role beforehand. So if you are paying more than unqualified one, then you need to make that clear on any advert and contract document that you set up. Thank you, Patrick. Next slide. And as we mentioned earlier as well, there are some grants available from the DFE for some of the secondary subjects. This is in line with, or mostly in line with, the bursaries that are offered for the non-salaried tuition fee paying routes as well. So you can see in this table that it probably won't come as a surprise which subjects are at the top of the list with the highest amount of funding offered, and those, unfortunately, which are at the lower end or not there at all. But it is still a brilliant offer from the DFE, particularly for those STEM subjects in particular, that the amount of funding that is available is actually more than the salary that is required. So the table shows you here in the middle column the amount of funding that is available, and then the column on the right shows what that figure minus the rate of unqualified one at the moment is. So for chemistry, computing, maths, physics, MFL, you're actually essentially getting money from the DFE that covers the cost of the salary entirely. Obviously, there are on costs that you'll need to factor in as well, but that makes it really viable for these subjects in particular to offer an apprenticeship. And as we mentioned earlier as well, the fee for the apprenticeship is £9,000, and that is covered by the apprenticeship levy. So if you are a levy paying school, that will be available to you to draw down to pay for the fee for this route. If you're not a levy paying school, then you can access co-investment funding, which covers 95% of the fee, with the remaining 5% paid by the school. So it should still be very accessible for lots of schools, regardless of your size and circumstances and whether you are a levy paying school or not. If you are within a trust, your trust will have policies in place and systems and accounts to access the apprenticeship service where you can access that funding. If you don't have that set up already, we can help you with that a little bit further down the line. And you may already have apprentices in other roles within the school already, so it may be something that you and your teams know a little bit about already, which is fantastic. As we said as well, as this is an employment-based route, the apprentices can't be asked to contribute to the cost of their training. They're not eligible to take out student loans, but that fee is the total cost and it is covered by the levy, which is brilliant. Now, for the recruitment process for the apprenticeship, it is slightly different from our standard SCITT route. All apprentices need to apply through the DFE Apply for Teacher Training portal. And once they've done that, they'll go through our internal processes for shortlisting. They'll be invited to an online recruitment and selection day, which will be the same as our standard SCITT route. So if you have attended any of those days in the past, you'll know what that looks like. If they're successful in that first stage process, they'll then be able to complete stage 2, which involves a formal observation by the employing head teacher or another senior colleague within your school, and an interview with representatives from the SCITT, just to go through some of the finer detail to make sure that the candidate is suitable for this particular route with sole responsibility teaching, and that you have everything in place and understand the requirements and expectations for the school as well. So in order to proceed with that process of stage 1 and stage 2 interviews, we'll need endorsement from the school in advance to be able to process the applicant's application. So you can find an endorsement form on our single page summary that I had put in the chat earlier, and we'll make sure that you've got that sent out in the email afterwards as well. Now, if you don't have an apprentice in mind already within your school, if you're interested in advertising for somebody, there are a couple of ways of finding a potential apprenticeship applicant. We have set up a separate area within the OTSA applicant pool and job board, which may be something that you're aware of already and use for other recruitment. But it's a system where potential applicants who aren't supported by a school can create a profile, and they can upload their CV or bits of job history and their kind of skills and knowledge that makes them suitable to be an apprentice. And schools will be able to register for an account to view and contact any applicants that are on the pool. You can also use the opposite side of the system on the job board to advertise a post if you want to create a vacancy for an apprentice, so that those same applicants will be able to view your advert on the same website. We would also encourage you to make use of any standard websites such as Indeed or My New Term if your school uses that, or indeed your own school website to advertise the posts that you're creating for an apprenticeship. And you can also use the government's Recruiting an Apprentice service to create an advert on there, which will then be available to anybody who's interested in apprenticeship nationally. That same system then talks through to the next stage of the Recruiting an Apprentice system, which will be needed to use to reserve the funding, the levy funding. So it's a system that you will need to get to know at some stage anyway. And as I said, if you're already recruiting apprentices elsewhere in the school, or if you're working within a trust that recruits apprentices, that is the system that will already be in place. We've also created an advert template, which we can share with you afterwards as well, which you can use to help create your advert for an apprentice, which has the key details to do with the salary, the start date, the contract terms, etc., which should be helpful to you as well.
Great, thank you, Marion. Are you just going to talk about this last little bit, and then I will finish up?
That is, that's essentially just a screenshot of the applicant pool and the jobs board section of the OTSA and OTSH websites. So that slide is kind of repeating what I've said already anyway. So yeah, do take over, Patrick.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and details, we'll send all of those out, including those templates as well as the guide. So in terms of next steps, we just listed those out for you here, depending on where you're at with this. I know a number of you on the call and other schools we're working with are already quite a long way down this route, have got people already or have started interviewing potential apprentices if they weren't in their school already. So those first 2 or 3 bullet points really just work through that. Once you've got somebody, please complete the school endorsement form, which is in a link to the summary and in the guide as well. So once we've got that, we know that the person, when they apply, is somebody that is linked to your school. As we've then talked about, they will go then through the standard application portal, the DFE apply system. That is open already for apprentices. So if you've got somebody in school, please make sure that you've submitted the endorsement to us before they make that application, because until that point, we obviously can't progress any further. We do have people applying, despite the fact that we try to say on all of the different websites, please don't apply for the apprenticeship unless you've got an employing school. But if it's somebody that is known to you, please make sure you do it in that order. We will then know that you're supporting them. They will submit their application. We will invite them to the first stage of the process that we talked about earlier. We're fairly certain in all respects that will be successful, but if there's anything that comes out of that, we will obviously discuss that with you. But that will mean that people will move on to the second stage, which we will then follow up, and one of the team will work with you to set up the second stage, which, as Stephanie talked about earlier, is really to clarify the expectations all round in terms of the different roles and responsibilities, and making sure that everybody is prepared and signs what we will share with you, the individual training plan and contract, which is essentially the 3-way agreement between us, you, and the apprentice. You'll also then obviously be working on your contract as a school, and we've got some template details that we can share with you there. as part of that, of course, you will be undertaking all the safer recruitment checks. And because we will then be responsible for the training of that person, we will then ask you to confirm that that's happened in terms of DBS and other safer recruitment checks. As it says, we will be very happy to guide you through all of those things at different stages to make it as clear as possible. Final couple of bits really then. Please at any stage direct any potential applicants to our website. We've got a detailed section you can see there in the middle about apprenticeships. We always love it when schools have a link to our website from theirs. And actually when we meet people at our information events that we run fairly regularly and we ask how they've heard about us, an incredibly high number of people say they heard about us either by seeing a roadside banner or by seeing a link on a school website, or by reading about us in a school newsletter. So I know lots of you will have heard me say this many, many times before, but those three things, a banner, a link on a website, and a newsletter item are incredibly powerful ways of spreading the knowledge of the different ways in which people can train locally. In general, please do as much of all of that as you can. And as I mentioned at the start, and just to reiterate, there's a section in the guide about marketing yourself and marketing the partnership that you have with us in lots of different respects. Michelle, who is here tonight, and one of our fantastic admin team, will be happy to share resources and materials that you can use in terms of marketing, etc. As well. Her email address is there, is also in the guide as well. So I think those are the key things that we wanted to say. Thank you very much for staying with us. We very much hope some of that has been useful. We'll send out the recording, we'll send out the slides, and we'll send out those documents as well. But we do have a few minutes. If you have specific questions that you would like to ask to any one of us, please do just unmute or wave or put a question in the chat. But if that's been the information that you needed, please head off and have a lovely evening. And thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's it. I'll stop talking. We can probably stop the recording as well.